Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Archives. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. A few years ago, during the hot, sticky months of summer, I lived in a house that I will never forget. I only stayed there for about 3 months, but in that short amount of time, I experienced some of the most bizarre and terrifying things of my life. It was a student house located just a few blocks away from the Jesuit university where I was studying. It was one of those old, creaky houses that feels like it has been there forever, with paint peeling slightly in the corners and floorboards that groaned whenever you walked on them. That summer, the house was supposed to be quiet. Most of my roommates had left town. One was traveling with a youth group in Australia, having the time of his life. Another had gone back home to visit family for a few weeks. Another roommate had recently moved out completely, leaving an empty room. So, for the most part, it was just me. I was the lone occupant of this big, empty, echoing house. Well, I was mostly alone. I had one friend, a guy I will call Andre, who hung around with me quite a lot. We both had jobs on campus, so our schedules were similar. We would go to work in the morning, finish up around 5 or 6 in the evening, and then head back to the house to chill. It was a simple routine. We would watch movies, play video games, and just enjoy the freedom of having a place to ourselves. But one night, the routine changed. I didn't hang out with Andre that evening. Instead, I decided to go out with another friend of mine, a girl I will call Karen. There was a party happening that night, and Karen really wanted to go. I, on the other hand, had zero interest in going. I was tired, and a loud, crowded party was the last thing I wanted. But Karen was insistent. I knew that if I didn't go, she would go alone. I also knew that she planned to drink, and I didn't want her driving herself home late at night in that condition. So, being the responsible friend, I agreed to go. The party was exactly what I expected. Loud, sweaty, and chaotic. Karen had a great time. She drank way too much and got completely trashed. By the time the party was winding down, she was barely able to walk in a straight line. I guided her to her car, put her in the passenger seat, and drove us back to my place. On the way home, she mumbled that she didn't want to go all the way back to her house. Her place was about a 30-minute drive away, and she was in no condition to handle a long car ride. She asked if she could crash at my place. I said yes, of course. We got back to the house late. The street was quiet, and the house looked dark and looming against the night sky. I helped her inside and got her settled in the living room. I offered her one of the empty bedrooms. After all, almost everyone was gone, so there were plenty of beds available. But she was too drunk to understand what I was saying. She just collapsed onto the couch in the living room and refused to move. I grabbed a blanket, threw it over her, and made sure she had some water nearby. Once I was sure she was safe and asleep, I decided to retire to my own room. My room was unique. It wasn't actually inside the main house. It was a converted space in the backyard, part of a standalone garage unit. To get to it, you had to walk out the back door of the main house, cross the grassy yard, and follow a concrete car path that led out to the street. My room had a large sliding glass door as the main entrance. I liked it back there. It was private, quiet, and completely disconnected from the rest of the house. It felt like my own little sanctuary. I walked out the back door of the main house, locking it behind me. I crossed the dark yard, the grass damp with dew, and slid open the glass door to my room. The air inside was cool and still. I sat down at my computer, wanting to decompress after the loud party. I decided to smoke a little bit of weed to help me relax. I packed a bowl, smoked, and settled in for a quiet night of browsing the internet and listening to music. I chilled out there for about an hour. The The time drifted by slowly. Around 2:01 in the morning, a thought crossed my mind. I should probably go check on Karen. She had been incredibly drunk, and I wanted to make sure she was okay. I wanted to check that she hadn't gotten sick or tried to wander off. I felt responsible for her. I stood up, stretched, and walked out of my sliding glass door. The night air was heavy. I crossed the yard again, walking toward the back door of the main house. The house was completely dark, a black shape against the slightly lighter sky. I reached the back door, turned the knob, and stepped inside. This is where things went wrong. As soon as my foot crossed the threshold into the house, the silence was shattered. First, I heard a shuffle. It sounded like feet scuffing against the floorboards, but then, almost instantly, it turned into something else. I heard what sounded like someone running, and not just jogging. This was a full-speed sprint. The sound was heavy and aggressive. It sounded like a large man running as fast as he could, right toward me. I froze. My hand was still on the doorknob. My heart slammed against my ribs, but as I stood there, paralyzed by the sound, my brain registered something that didn't make sense. The sound was wrong. The physics of it were impossible. The heavy, thudding footsteps were getting louder and closer, coming straight down the hallway toward the kitchen where I was standing. But there was no echo. There was no vibration on the floor. I realized with a jolt of absolute terror that the footsteps weren't coming from the floor. They were coming from the ceiling. It sounded exactly as if someone was running upside down, their heavy boots slamming against the plaster of the ceiling, rushing directly at my head. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. Thump, 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 thump. Then, just as the footsteps reached the spot directly above where I was standing, the running stopped abruptly. Silence for a split second, then crash. From down the hallway near the front of the house, I heard a massive noise. It sounded like dozens of heavy cardboard boxes being pushed over and tumbling down. It was a chaotic, loud, tumbling sound. It came from a specific room, the bedroom located just across the hall from the living room where Karen was sleeping. My mind started racing. I was freaking out. The weed I had smoked earlier was gone from my system, replaced instantly by pure adrenaline. My first thought wasn't ghosts. My first thought was that there was a maniac in the house. "Karen!" I called out. My voice sounded small and shaky in the dark kitchen. No answer. "Karen!" I yelled louder this time. Still no answer. A terrible, cold feeling washed over me. I thought to myself, this is it. This is how I die. I was convinced that someone had broken in. I thought that whoever or whatever had made those footsteps had just attacked Karen. I imagined the worst. I thought she was probably already dead. I thought some psycho was hiding in the dark, waiting for me to walk down that hallway. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might pass out. I wanted to turn around, run back to my garage, lock the door and call the police. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave my friend in there. If she was hurt, if she was scared, I had to help her. I couldn't be a coward. I took a deep breath. I tried to talk myself down. I whispered to myself, "Okay, you smoked. You are paranoid. You are freaking out for no reason. It is all in your head. It is just you. Chill the fuck out. Go check on her." I forced my legs to move. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway. The house was pitch black, shadows stretching out in every direction. I walked toward the living room, listening intently for breathing, for movement, for the killer I was sure was waiting for me. I reached the living room and looked at the couch. It was empty. The blanket was tossed aside. Karen was gone. My panic spiked again. "Karen!" I started to shout, spinning around. And there she was. She was standing in the doorway of the bedroom where I had heard the boxes crashing. She was rubbing her eyes, looking sleepy and confused. "What are you doing?" she asked me in a groggy voice. I stared at her. I was breathless, sweaty, and terrified. "What the fuck?" I yelled, losing my cool completely. "What are you doing in there? Were you making all that noise?" She looked at me like I was insane. She blinked slowly, trying to process why I was yelling. I was asleep, she said. I moved to the bed because the couch sucks. It's uncomfortable. I looked past her into the bedroom. I expected to see a disaster. I expected to see boxes overturned, furniture knocked down, chaos. I turned on the hallway light. The room was empty. There were no cardboard boxes. There was nothing on the floor. The room was perfectly tidy. The bed was rumpled, where she had been sleeping, but otherwise the room was silent and still. Okay, I stammered, my brain trying to catch up. But I heard all of this shit going on. Are you okay? She shook her head. I'm fine. I was sleeping. You didn't hear anything at all? I asked, desperate for her to confirm what I had experienced. You didn't hear the running, the crashing? No, she said. I didn't hear anything. Why? What's going on? I looked at her face. She was telling the truth. She wasn't scared. She was just tired and hungover. I realized that if I told her I heard ghost footsteps running on the ceiling, she would freak out. I didn't want to scare her, and I didn't want to sound like a lunatic. Okay, I said, forcing myself to calm down. Okay, never mind. Just go back to bed. I'm sorry I woke you up. I watched her climb back into the bed and pull the covers up. She was asleep again in seconds. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening. The house was dead silent. No creaks, no footsteps, just the heavy, suffocating silence of an old house. I turned off the light and walked back to my room in the garage. I ran across the yard. I locked the sliding glass door and double-checked it. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that heavy, upside-down sprinting sound rushing toward me. A few days passed. I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was an animal on the roof. Maybe the weed had messed with my hearing more than I thought. Then Andre came over to hang out. We were sitting in the living room playing video games. I paused the game and turned to him. Hey man, I said. Something weird happened the other night. I told him the whole story. I told him about coming in from the garage, the footsteps on the ceiling, and the sound of the crashing boxes that didn't exist. I expected him to laugh at me. I expected him to tell me I was crazy. Instead, his face went pale. His eyes got wide. Oh shit, he said. Footsteps? Yeah, I've heard that. I looked at him squarely. What, are you serious? I asked. I thought he might be messing with me. No, I'm serious, man, he said, his voice lowering. When I sleep over here, I hear shit all the time. I hear walking in the hallway when no one is up. I've wanted to tell you, but yeah. I mean, it makes me sound paranoid. I didn't want you to think I was weird. A chill went down my spine. It wasn't just me. It is scary, I said to him. How many stories people don't tell because they are afraid of sounding crazy. That conversation opened the floodgates. A few weeks later, the rest of the housemates returned from their trips. The house was full of people again. One night, we were all sitting around having dinner and I mentioned the footsteps. As soon as I said it, everyone started talking. It turned out I wasn't the only one experiencing strange things. Everyone had a story. I hear scampering footsteps late. At night, one roommate said. Usually between 2 or 3 hours in the morning. It sounds like someone running back and forth in the hall. Another roommate chimed in. Sometimes, he said, looking around the table to make sure we believed him. I will wake up before you guys in the morning. I'll go into the kitchen to make coffee and I'll find all the drawers and cabinets open, every single one. Just wide open. Nothing is missing. Nothing is messy. It's just like someone opened them all at once and left them there. We all sat there in silence. The image of walking into a kitchen and seeing every cabinet gaping open was terrifying. But the most messed up story came from the guy who had lived in the house the longest. He was the only one who had stayed there for the entire previous school year. He listened to our stories, nodding his head slowly. "You know," he said quietly, "the landlady told me something when I first moved in." We all leaned in. "Her father used to live here," he said. "He died about 5 years ago." He pointed down the hallway. "He died in that room, the one across from the living room." My blood ran cold. That was the room where Karen had been sleeping. That was the room where I heard the massive crash of boxes. That was the room where the running footsteps had stopped. I swore I heard those boxes fall. I knew what I heard, and now I knew that I had been standing right outside the room where a man had died, listening to the echoes of something that wasn't there. The atmosphere in the house changed after that. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We were all on edge. Every creak, every shadow, every draft felt sinister. One of my housemates was particularly shaken. He had experienced the kitchen cabinets opening, and hearing the story about the death pushed him over the edge. He was a religious guy, and he decided he couldn't live like this anymore. He contacted a priest from the university. He asked him to come to the house. I had never seen anything like it. The priest arrived in his clerical collar, carrying a small bag. He came into our messy student house and performed what basically amounted to an exorcism. I didn't know you could exorcise a house. I thought that was just for people in movies, but apparently you can bless and cleanse a place. The priest went from room to room. He hung a few crucifixes on the walls. He prayed in Latin. He splattered holy water in the corners of the rooms, especially in the hallway and the bedroom where the father had died. We all stood there watching awkwardly, hoping it would work. After he left, the house felt different. Maybe it was quiet. Maybe it was just the power of suggestion. I didn't stick around to find out if it lasted. My lease was up shortly after that summer ended. I packed up my stuff, moved out of the garage room, and got a new place as far away from that house as I could. I have never gone back. I have never asked the current residents if they hear running on the ceiling. I don't want to know. But sometimes late at night, when I am sitting in my quiet apartment, I think about that sound. I think about the heavy, impossible footsteps running upside down above my head, rushing toward me in the dark. And I am just glad I don't live there anymore. My grandma lives in a big old Victorian house in West Virginia, the kind of house that looks like it belongs in a painting or on the front cover of a history book. It's been in our family for around a century and a half. Nearly 150 years of people being born there, growing up there, growing old there, and dying there. The house has a certain weight, a certain presence, like it holds all those years inside its walls. There's no central heating or cooling, so in the summer, the upstairs gets hot and stuffy, and in the winter, the entire place feels like one big draft, no matter how many blankets you pile on. Creaky floors, heavy doors, tall windows that let in moonlight, and long, narrow hallways. It's the kind of house that feels alive even when it's completely silent. My grandfather passed away a few years ago, but before he died, he shared a story about one of our ancestors who used to live in that house. Some kind of great-great-great-grandfather from way back. He told the story the way old men sometimes do, slowly, with long pauses, like he was remembering every detail fresh. My family didn't always talk about the past in detail, but this was one of the few stories they all seemed to know something about. The kind passed down from generation to generation, whispered at the dinner table or during holidays when someone had one glass of wine too many. According to my grandfather, the house wasn't always full of people the way it is now. Sometimes family would go away for weeks at a time, leaving someone behind to watch the place. In the story he told, our great-great-great-grandfather was alone in the house one night. The rest of the family was away, and he had the place to himself. In a house that big, being alone means something different. Silence fills every room. Darkness seems deeper. Even the smallest sound becomes louder. He went to bed like normal, but sometime in the middle of the night, he woke up to a noise in the hallway outside his bedroom. Not a soft noise. Not the kind of sound a house makes as it settles. According to my grandfather, it was a clear sound. Something or someone moving around. The upstairs floor of the house has an unusual layout. There are two staircases, one leading down to the back of the house and one leading to the front. Between these two staircases is a short common hallway, but the stairs themselves are separated by a thick wall. Rooms branch off from both sides, so at night, shadows collect everywhere. The great-great-great-grandfather slept on the side near the back staircase. When he heard the sound, he sat up quickly. Houses make noises all the time, but he knew this one wasn't the house. His instinct told him it was something else. So he reached into the drawer of the nightstand beside his bed and grabbed the revolver he always kept there. People back then didn't think twice about having a gun in reach. It was just part of life. He opened his bedroom door. Across the hallway, through the dim light and the doorway of another room, he saw a figure, a white figure, standing in silence, not moving, not breathing, just standing there. His heart hammered inside his chest. The house was empty, he knew that. There was no reason anyone should be upstairs, no reason anyone should be in the hallway. He raised the revolver, aimed at the figure, and fired once, then again, then again. 6 shots, all 6. The flashes from the gun lit up the hallway like lightning. Each time the hallway lit up, he saw the white figure in front of him, still there, never reacting, never flinching, never falling. And then, as he stepped forward slowly, revolver still raised, it vanished, completely, like stepping behind an invisible wall and disappearing. No sound, no movement, no trace. He walked closer, his hands shaking, ready to fire more shots, even though the gun was empty. When he reached the spot where the figure had been, nothing was there. No footprints, no torn fabric, no blood, no bullet holes in the wall behind it. The wood wasn't even chipped. It was as if he had fired into empty air. My grandfather always said that story with a serious face. No laughter, no jokes. He believed it. And the way he told it, you could tell that the whole family believed it too. Stories don't last 100 years unless there's something in them that people can't explain or forget. Years later, I had my own experience in that house, and it changed the way I thought about the story completely. I was visiting my grandma, staying the night in one of the guest bedrooms upstairs. My room was right above the foyer in the front of the house and the parlor next to it. I liked the room during the daytime because the window overlooked the street, and from up high you could see the old lampposts and the quiet road stretching down the hill. But at night, that room felt different. The shadows were deeper. The air was colder. The old wooden floor creaked under your feet, even if you moved slowly. I went to bed late that night, reading a book under the dim lamp beside the bed. My grandma always went to sleep early, so the house was completely silent. Outside, the moon shone so brightly that the street below looked almost blue. I remember checking the clock. It was a little after 3 in the morning. That was when I heard the voices. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was people on the street, maybe a group walking home from somewhere. The house faced the street, so it wasn't unusual to hear someone talking outside at night. But the voices kept going. They weren't fading. They weren't moving away. They were getting louder. I sat up in bed and listened. There were many voices together, low murmurs, louder bursts, laughter. I heard what sounded like children, adults, mixed in. It didn't sound like one group of people. It sounded like a crowd, like dozens of people talking over each other. The strange thing was, the sound wasn't coming from outside the window anymore. It was coming from below me, underneath the bed. My whole body froze. For a few seconds, I tried to convince myself that the voices were coming from the parlor beneath my room. Maybe the sound was traveling weirdly through the floorboards, but the longer I listened, the more certain I became. The voices were directly beneath my bed, not the room below. They were under me, in the floor itself, or in the air, or in the walls, like a gathering taking place inside the house, without anyone physically there. The laughter got louder, the children's voices were clearer, but I still couldn't make out a single word they were saying. It was like listening to a radio between stations, loud but impossible to understand. A sound that shouldn't make sense, but somehow does. I got up slowly and walked to the window. I didn't want to, but some part of me needed to look outside. I pressed my face to the glass. The street below was empty, completely empty. Not a single person, not a car, just pale moonlight on the pavement and the long shadows of trees. The voices continued under me, echoing upward like a crowd packed tightly into the floorboards. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The hair on my arms stood up. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I got back into bed and lay perfectly still, like any movement might draw attention to me. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling. Every second felt long and heavy. After what felt like 5 minutes, maybe more, maybe less, the voices started to fade. First, the laughter softened. Then the children's voices echoed away. Then the murmurs dropped into silence. The moment the last whisper disappeared, the temperature in the room rose slightly, as if someone had opened a window that had been shut tight. I didn't sleep again until the sun was coming up, and I could hear my grandma downstairs making coffee. When I told her about the voices the next morning, she didn't laugh. She didn't tell me I imagined it. She didn't act surprised. She just nodded slowly, almost like she had heard something like that before, or like she already knew what I was talking about. I never asked her more. I didn't want to know, and I haven't slept in that room since. Something about that house holds the past, in a way I can't explain. Not just memories, not just stories, but sounds and shapes, and moments that don't belong to the world of the living anymore. And whatever passed through that house at 3 a.m, it wasn't human. Where I grew up, there was one road everybody knew about, even if they pretended they didn't. Triple Lakes Road. People in town talked about it the same way they talked about local disasters, ghost stories, and secrets. Everyone knew someone who had crashed there, someone who had almost died there, someone who avoided it completely after dark. The road twisted through the woods like a living thing. It curved and dipped and climbed unpredictably, with sharp turns that came out of nowhere and drop-offs with no guardrails. For decades, teenagers and young adults would get drunk and drive along Triple Lakes Road to show off, thrill-seek, or test their luck. Many didn't make it home. Many families had stood by fresh graves because of that road. Over time, the accidents blended together in people's memories, but the stories, the legends, lived on. There were a lot of them. The old witch's house hidden deep in the trees, the red room in an abandoned building nearby, strange lights in the woods, screams people swore they heard at midnight, car engines dying without explanation. My friends and I always had a million creepy stories about the place. We went exploring, partly because we were bored teenagers, partly because we thought we were braver than everyone else, and partly because we liked scaring each other. And honestly, we had some scary experiences on that road. Too many to write down at once. But the one that still makes my stomach twist happened at a place on Triple Lakes Road known as Hernando's Bridge. Even the name sounded wrong, like something out of a horror movie. The legend said that back in 1969, a man named Hernando murdered his own family and hung their bodies from meat hooks underneath the bridge. People said he was mentally unstable or possessed, or influenced by something in the woods. The stories changed depending on who told them, but all versions agreed on one thing. Something terrible happened on that bridge. Whether any of it was true or exaggerated over time, no one really knew. Some old newspaper reports suggested a family tragedy happened near there around that time, but no one could ever confirm the worst parts of the story. What mattered to people wasn't the facts, it was the feeling. Everyone who grew up there knew the dread surrounding that bridge. They also said that if you drove across Hernando's bridge at night, with your headlights turned off, you would hear screaming from underneath. Some said they heard crying. Some said they heard voices begging for help. Some said they heard banging on the underside of their car, as if someone was hanging there. My friends and I tried the headlights off trick several times. Nothing happened. We always ended up laughing it off, saying maybe the ghosts didn't like us, or maybe the stories were all made up. But one night, everything changed. One summer weekend, around midnight, we decided to drive to the bridge, just to mess around and see if we could scare ourselves for fun. There were 5 of us, me, my friend Tim, 2 other guys, and a girl who was close with all of us. We'll call her Sarah. She was a spiritualist, someone who said she had seen ghosts and dealt with dark experiences since childhood. She didn't brag about it. She didn't exaggerate. She actually avoided talking about it unless someone asked. And because she was usually calm and reasonable, we believed her more than we believed most people. As we approached the bridge, everything felt strange. Triple Lakes Road was already dark at night, but this particular stretch felt different. The road leading to the bridge was open at first, the sky visible above us. But as the bridge got closer, the trees began closing in overhead, bending toward each other like tall shadows leaning in to whisper. The branches tangled above the road, creating a tunnel that blocked out the moonlight. The car headlights cut through the darkness, but even they seemed weaker under that canopy of trees. There were no houses nearby, no driveways, no parked cars, just road, trees, and darkness. My friend parked about 20 yards before the bridge. The car sat in the middle of the road with the headlights shining forward. They weren't enough to illuminate everything, just enough to show the narrow road, the wooden railing of the bridge, and the beginning of the slope that led down underneath it. We all got out of the car. The air was warm but felt heavy, like the humidity had settled low to the ground. Every sound we made echoed unusually loud. Footsteps on gravel, the slam of the car door, the rustle of leaves. Someone said, "Let's go down under it." We all agreed, though none of us really wanted to. We started walking down the dirt slope toward the underside of the bridge. The beam from the headlights stretched only partway down, and the rest was swallowed by darkness. The trees rustled quietly, even though there was hardly any wind. The night felt thick, like the woods were holding their breath. But then Sarah suddenly stopped walking. She froze like she hit an invisible wall. She started shaking violently, like her whole body was being pulled in different directions. She fell to her knees, planted her hands in the dirt, and burst into tears. "We need to go back," she said. "We need to go back right now." Her voice wasn't normal. It sounded terrified, small, trembling. We all stopped, confused and worried. She had never acted like this before, ever. She was usually the calmest person in the group, the one who comforted everyone else. Seeing her like that made something cold slide down my spine. I reached for her arm to help her stand, but she screamed, "No," so loudly and sharply it felt like the sound stabbed right through me. I let go immediately. She kept shaking her head over and over. She said something was wrong, something bad, something dangerous. She didn't want to explain. She wouldn't look at us. Just kept repeating that we needed to get back in the car. We stood around her for a minute or two trying to calm her down. Eventually she stopped shaking, but she refused to move from that spot. We convinced her to wait by the car where she felt safe. She wiped her face, hugged her knees to her chest, and sat on the ground near the headlights. We should have listened to her. We should have gotten back in the car, but we didn't. We were young, stupid, and way too curious. As soon as she was sitting safely by the road, the rest of us kept going. We walked down the slope like four idiots trying to laugh off the fear tightening in our chests. The deeper we went, the darker it got. The bridge loomed above us like a giant black shadow. The air got cooler. The woods around us felt strangely quiet, not silent but muted, like we were hearing everything through a thick wall. Then I heard it. Whispering. At first it sounded like distant voices, several of them soft and muffled. I thought maybe there were teenagers down there partying, maybe sitting around a bonfire or smoking something. The whispers sounded too casual to be ghosts, too normal. But as we got closer to the underside of the bridge, something felt off. The whispering wasn't English. It wasn't even like a real language. It was a jumble of sounds, overlapping voices, speaking at different speeds, different tones, all layered on top of each other. Some voices were high-pitched, some were low, some sounded like they were right next to my ear, others sounded like they were far away. It didn't sound like people having a conversation. It sounded like a crowd of voices whispering over each other on purpose, weaving together into something unsettling and wrong. We slowed down. All four of us heard it. Our breathing got faster. My hands started sweating. The hairs on my arms stood up. But we kept going. We wanted to see the people under the bridge. We wanted to talk to them. If there really was a group down there, they might have known something about the rumors or the legend. Maybe we could ask them if they heard anything weird before we arrived. But when we reached the bottom of the slope and looked under the bridge, there was no one there. Just shadows. Just graffiti. Just us. The whispering stopped immediately, not gradually, not slowly, instantly, just gone. We looked around, trying to find footprints or beer cans or anything that proved someone had been there. Nothing. The dirt was untouched. The ground was empty. The air felt colder, heavier, stiller. All four of us were scared now. Even Tim, who was usually the bravest, looked shaken. But he did something that made everything worse. He yelled out, "Hello!" His shout echoed loudly under the bridge, bouncing off the walls of the woods. Then everything went quiet, completely quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. For a few seconds we stood there frozen. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, somewhere far away but loud enough to reach us, a woman screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was sharp, painful, full of terror. It sounded like a woman in absolute agony, like she was being attacked, hurt, or murdered. The kind of scream that hits you in your chest and doesn't let go. The kind of scream you never forget. We didn't even look at each other. We didn't say a single word. We just ran. We ran up the hill so fast we were slipping on dirt, grabbing branches, pushing each other out of the way. We sprinted to the car, threw ourselves inside, slammed the doors, and locked them all at once. My friend floored the gas pedal so hard, we almost crashed into a tree as we sped away. The tires screeched on the pavement. We didn't breathe or speak until we had driven miles down the road and reached a well-lit area. We were shaking, pale, sweating. None of us have gone back to Hernando's Bridge since. And even now, years later, when I think about the whispering, the empty darkness, and that scream ripping through the woods, my skin still crawls. Some stories stay legends, but some become personal. This happened when I was around 10 years old, but even now, so many years later, the memory is still sharp in my mind. It comes back to me in flashes. The bright sunlight on the sea, the quiet sound of waves far below the cliffs, the long stretch of the footpath, the laughter of kids, and then that cottage, that strange old cottage, and the thing we saw inside it. Every part of that day was normal until it suddenly wasn't. And once it wasn't, it became one of the clearest, scariest moments of my childhood. Our school decided to take us on a long walk along the cliffs by the sea toward a nearby village. It was supposed to be a fun, simple outing. The teachers kept saying how lucky we were because the weather was perfect. Bright blue sky, not a single cloud, and a cool breeze blowing in from the ocean. The sea stretched out forever, shiny and calm, and every so often we would stop just to look at it. The walk was long for little kids, maybe 3 or 4 miles, but we didn't care. When you're 10, distance feels different. Everything feels like part of an adventure. All the kids were scattered across the footpath. Some rushed forward, some walked slowly, some kept stopping to pick flowers or look over the edge of the cliff. Teachers and volunteer helpers walked beside us, making sure no one wandered off or got too close to the drop. I was walking with 3 of my closest friends at the time. We were somewhere near the back of the group, half chatting, half kicking stones along the path. Behind us was an older student, a teenager who had volunteered to help the teachers. He probably didn't even want to be there, but he was supposed to watch us and make sure none of us accidentally fell off the cliffs or did something stupid. He didn't pay attention most of the walk. He had headphones on half the time, pretending not to hear us. We didn't mind. Kids like us were happy to be mostly free. As the walk went on, we reached the highest point of the cliffs, a place where the land leveled out into a flat area with fields stretching away from the edge. That was where we saw it, a cottage, a very simple one. Square shape, white walls, small windows, 2 stories tall. It sat alone in a field like it had been forgotten there. No cars around, no garden, no signs of anyone living there. Just empty fields and the sound of distant waves crashing far below. From far away, it looked ordinary. Old, but ordinary. Maybe a farmer's house from long ago that had never been torn down. But as we got closer, we noticed how worn down it really was. The paint on the walls had peeled in big patches. Some of the window frames looked crooked. The grass around it was overgrown, and there were no signs that anyone had taken care of it in a long time. Then we noticed something else. The front door was open. Not wide open, just slightly pushed inward, like someone might have walked in or walked out recently. The wind made it move a little, gently creaking. 10-year-old kids are curious by nature, and we were definitely no exception. We slowed down, looked at each other, whispered, "Was anyone inside? Could we look? Should we go in?" The teenage helper behind us clearly didn't care. He was 10 steps behind, kicking dirt and looking bored. He wasn't paying attention. No adults were nearby. So naturally, we did exactly what we weren't supposed to do. We went inside. We pushed the door open a little more. It groaned loudly, like it hadn't moved in a long time. The air inside felt different, cooler, stale, like a place that had been shut tight for many years. The cottage was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no carpet, no curtains. Just dusty floors and plain walls. A couple of small rooms on the bottom level, and a narrow wooden staircase leading to the upper floor. The 4 of us stepped inside slowly. Every sound echoed in the empty space. Our footsteps sounded too loud. The floorboards creaked under our weight. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and the sea. "Maybe someone used to live here," one of my friends whispered. "Maybe it's abandoned," another said. We didn't talk loudly. Somehow the house didn't feel like a place where you should make noise. We tiptoed from room to room, looking at the empty walls, imagining who might have lived there decades ago. Then we saw the staircase. It was narrow, old and dusty, with worn-down wooden steps. It led up into a small landing we could barely see from where we stood. We looked at each other, and because we were brave in the way only children can be, We started climbing. The stairs creaked with every step. Dust floated in the air as we walked. Halfway up, I felt the strange sensation of being watched, the tiny, prickling feeling on the back of your neck. I brushed it off as nerves. It was an old house. Old houses feel like that. At the top of the stairs was a small landing with 2 bedroom doors. The door directly in front of us was open, and leaning against the wall across from it, almost exactly at our eye level, was a large old mirror. Not a modern mirror, not the kind you find at home. The frame was chipped. The glass was spotted. It looked like it had survived decades without ever being cleaned or moved. We could see ourselves in it. 4 kids standing in a dusty landing, looking tired and curious, breathing a little fast because we walked up the stairs too quickly. Then we saw something else. In the mirror behind us was the reflection of a man, a grown man, tall, broad, standing a few feet behind us in the doorway at the top of the stairs, except when we turned around, there was no one there. Just the landing, just the walls, just the empty bedroom, just us. We froze. No one breathed. We turned back to the mirror. The man was still there, not moving fast, but moving toward us slowly, 1 step at a time. His face wasn't clear. His clothes weren't clear. Everything about him looked hazy, like he was covered in shadows, even though we were standing in bright daylight, coming through the upstairs window. But he was real enough, solid enough, close enough that my stomach dropped and every part of me screamed to run. I don't remember which one of us moved first. Maybe we all moved at the same time. Suddenly, the landing erupted in chaos. Gasps, panicked breaths, footsteps pounding on old wood. We shoved each other, bumped shoulders, scrambled down the stairs as fast as our legs would move. The staircase felt too narrow, the walls felt too close, the house felt too small. I remember nearly tripping on the last step. One of my friends pushed the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. We burst out into the sunlight, into the fresh air, into the open field. None of us looked back. We ran, hard, fast, like something was chasing us. Our feet slammed against the path. Our breath burned our lungs. My legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't stop. None of us could. We ran across the field, back toward the footpath, away from the cottage, away from the cliffs, away from whatever we had seen. We caught up with the rest of the group half a mile later. The teachers told us to slow down, asked what we were doing, why we were running. We didn't answer. We couldn't. We were too out of breath and too terrified. For the rest of the walk, we stayed in the middle of the group. We didn't wander, we didn't explore, we didn't talk much. Every time I blinked, I saw the man's shadowy figure again, standing behind us. Not in the house, not in real life, but in my mind, like a burnt image that refused to fade. We never went near that cottage again. Whenever the path led close to it on future school walks, I made sure to look straight ahead and pretend it wasn't there. Even now, as an adult, when I think back on that day, my skin crawls. I can't explain what we saw. Maybe it was some trick of light. Maybe our imaginations made it worse. But the mirror showed something that wasn't in the room, something moving, something looking at us. And if we hadn't run, I don't know what would have happened. I only know one thing for sure. I have never trusted mirrors in old, empty houses since. My mom used to tell me stories about the house she and my dad rented in North Carolina when I was just a baby. I was less than a year old at the time, so of course I remember nothing. Growing up, I always thought my mom exaggerated things because she drank a lot and liked telling dramatic stories. She would describe strange noises, people standing in the hallway, cold spots in the living room, and shadows that moved on their own. I didn't take it seriously. I thought she was just trying to scare me or make her life sound more interesting. Years later, when I was older, I brought it up with my dad. I expected him to roll his eyes and say something like, "You know how your mom is." But instead, he sat quietly for a moment and nodded. Then he told me a story that matched hers almost exactly, except his version was calmer, clearer, and much scarier because of how normal he made it sound. He was not someone who believed in ghosts, and he rarely talked about anything unusual. So hearing him describe that night in detail made the whole thing real in a way my mom's stories never did. Back then, my dad worked graveyard shifts. He went into work at night and came home in the early morning. My mom worked mornings, so they had a system. He would come home around 4 a.m., and she would leave shortly after. That way, someone was always home with me. My dad said that on the night this happened, nothing felt unusual at first. He came home the same way he always did. He parked the car, walked up the small path to the front porch, unlocked the door, and stepped into the dim, quiet house. The living room was dark except for a faint glow from the porch light leaking through the curtains. He set his keys down on the counter, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. He was exhausted. He said graveyard shifts were brutal, the kind of tired that feels heavy in your bones. Lying there with his eyes half closed was our dog, a white German shepherd named Denai. She was loyal, smart, and protective. She hardly ever barked or growled unless something was really wrong. My dad trusted that dog more than most people. He always said if Denai reacted to something, you reacted too. My dad was drifting off to sleep on the couch when he heard my mom getting ready for work. He wasn't fully awake, just aware enough to hear doors opening and closing, feet moving around the kitchen, the soft sound of clothing being pulled on. He kept his eyes shut, thinking he would just rest for a minute while she finished getting ready. My mom left like usual, and the house went silent. He fell asleep. A short time later, he wasn't sure if it was minutes or an hour. He felt the sensation that someone was near him. You know that strange instinct you get when someone is standing close, even if you're not looking. He felt that. It pulled him halfway out of sleep. His eyes opened slightly, heavy with fatigue. Someone was standing over him. A figure, a person. Not sitting, not walking past, standing directly over the couch, looking down at him. His first thought was that it was my mom. Maybe she forgot something. Maybe she needed help with something. Maybe she wasn't done getting ready. He blinked slowly, still half asleep, and the figure turned and moved down the hallway toward my bedroom. My room was at the end of the hall, a small space with a crib, a dresser, and a rocking chair. I slept there every night. My dad said he didn't panic at first. He simply thought my mom needed to check on me before she left. The figure was not in a hurry. It just walked calmly toward my door. My dad closed his eyes for a second, trying to wake up fully. He told me later that he had that heavy, foggy feeling you get when you're exhausted and waking up too fast. But then something happened that snapped him awake instantly. Denai, the dog, jumped to her feet. She stood at the edge of the couch, staring down the hallway, ears forward, body stiff. Her hair lifted along her back. She growled, a low, deep growl that my dad said he had only heard once or twice in her entire life. It was the sound an animal makes when it is terrified but ready to fight. My dad sat up straight, all the tiredness gone in an instant. His heart started pounding. He looked at the hallway. The lights were off. The shadows were thick. The figure he thought was my mom was gone. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Denai growled louder. My dad looked toward the front door and saw something that made his stomach drop. The door was slightly open, not wide, just cracked. Enough that the cold air from outside drifted into the living room. My mom would never leave it open. She was always careful, always locked it behind her. She would close it, check it, double-check it. He shouted her name. No answer. Denai barked now, one sharp, angry bark. Then she ran toward the hallway, stopping at the edge as if she was too scared to go any farther. My dad followed her with his heart thudding hard in his chest. He said every part of him suddenly felt awake, too awake, in the way you only feel when adrenaline and fear meet at the same time. He pushed open the door to my room. He expected, in the worst part of his mind, to find a stranger holding me, or hurting me, or even worse. He was ready to fight. He said he didn't even think about being afraid for himself. Only for me. He ran into the room prepared for anything, but what he found made no sense. No one was in the room. There was no stranger, no shadowy figure, no signs of a break-in, no footprints, nothing. But the room itself was a disaster. All the furniture, the dresser, the rocking chair, the little side table, everything had been shoved up against the far wall near the window. The crib had been pushed too, tilted at an angle, smashed against the dresser. My toys were scattered everywhere. Blankets were on the floor. The curtains were blowing inward. The window was open, wide open. Cold morning air swept into the room and made the curtains billow. The window looked out into the dark yard. Nothing was outside. Nothing was below the window. Nothing was moving. Then he saw me. I was standing in the middle of my crib, not holding the railing, not leaning on anything. Just standing straight up, my little baby hands clenched tightly at my sides, screaming at the top of my lungs. He said I looked absolutely terrified, not crying the way babies cry when they're hungry or tired, crying like something had scared me down to my bones, like I'd seen something too big for my small mind to understand. My face was red, my mouth wide open, tears pouring down my cheeks. He scooped me up instantly. He checked the window frame, the floor, the hall, anything that might show how the furniture had moved or who had been in the house. There was nothing, no footprints, no scratches, no muddy shoes, no signs of someone climbing in or out, no signs of forced entry at the front door, no broken locks, no fingerprints, no nothing. But something had been there. Something had walked down that hallway. Something had stood over him while he slept. Something had gone into my room. Something had pushed heavy furniture across the floor in total silence. Something had opened the window. And something had scared me so badly that I screamed until my voice broke. When my mom came home later and my dad told her everything, she insisted she had locked the door. She remembered turning the bolt. She remembered pulling on the door to make sure it was shut. She even remembered checking it twice because she was rushing that morning. My dad didn't argue. He believed her, but he also believed his own eyes. He still accuses her sometimes, only jokingly, of leaving the door open, but the truth is, neither of them thinks she did. The lock worked fine. The door didn't have a draft problem. It had never opened on its own before. When my dad talked about that night, the part that frightened him most wasn't the open door or the window or the missing figure. It wasn't even the furniture shoved to one side. It was Denai, the dog. He said the look in her eyes, the way her hair stood up, the way she growled from deep in her chest. It was the kind of reaction an animal has when it senses something humans can't, something dangerous, something wrong, something they want to attack but also want to run away from. He said Denai was never the same after that night. She became more protective, more alert, more restless. She paced a lot. She slept in the doorway of my room every night afterward. She never relaxed in that house again. My parents moved out not long after. Even now, when I think about that story, I feel a chill go down my back. Whatever happened that night, whoever or whatever was in that house, it left a mark on my family. Not something you can see, not something you can explain, but something real enough to be remembered decades later. And sometimes I wonder what I saw as a baby, what I was looking at when I stood there screaming, what I watched while someone or something moved all the furniture in silence, what walked down that hallway and stood over my sleeping father. I don't remember the event, but something deep inside me reacts when I hear that story, like a memory buried too far to reach. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. In my hometown, there is a place that everyone knows about, but very few people like to visit after the sun goes down. It is a large, sprawling graveyard that sits right on the edge of town, bordered by a wide, dark river that moves slowly and silently. The geography of the place is important to understand why it feels so unsettled. There is a large open field right next to the graveyard, a patch of green land where the local high school kids have hung out for generations. Separating the field from the graves is a massive stone wall. It is an old, imposing structure, standing about 8 feet high, built from rough, dark stones that look like they have been there for hundreds of years. Over time, nature has tried to reclaim the wall. Thick shrubbery and ivy grow all over it, climbing up the sides and spilling over the top. The plants are dense and tangled, reaching out about a meter or two from the wall itself, creating a sort of green canopy that hangs over the edge of the field. During the day, it just looks like an overgrown garden, but at night, those bushes cast long, strange shadows that look like reaching hands. Ever since I was about 10 years old, my brother and I have had a fascinating interest in a specific story my dad used to tell us. It was not a bedtime story meant to comfort us. It was a true story, a memory from his youth that clearly still bothered him, even if he tried to laugh it off. We would beg him to tell it whenever we drove past that old graveyard. The story goes back about 30 years. My dad was 17 at the time, living the typical life of a teenager in a small town. One summer night, he was hanging out in that field next to the graveyard wall. It was him, his girlfriend at the time, and a whole load of other friends. They were doing what teenagers do, talking, laughing, maybe drinking a little bit, just enjoying the freedom of being young and out late. It was around 2 in the morning. The night was incredibly still. My dad always emphasizes this part of the story. He says there was absolutely no wind that night. The air was heavy and stagnant. The trees were perfectly still and the grass wasn't moving. It was dead calm. Suddenly, the conversation in the group died down because someone noticed something strange. The thick bushes growing on top of the 8-foot wall started shaking. It wasn't just a little rustle. The shrubs were shaking violently, thrashing back and forth as if something was physically grabbing them and yanking them around. The group of friends went silent. They looked at the trees nearby. Nothing was moving. They looked at the grass. Still. There was no breeze at all. Yet this one specific patch of shrubbery on the graveyard wall was moving like it was caught in a hurricane. The kids were baffled. They were all staring at it, trying to figure out what could be causing it. Some of the girls started getting scared, whispering that they should leave. But my dad was 17, and he was with his girlfriend. He had an image to maintain. He wanted to be the tough guy, the protector. He couldn't just run away from a shaking bush. He saw it as a challenge, an opportunity to show off his bravery. So, puffing out his chest, he told everyone to calm down. He said he would go check it out. His girlfriend, perhaps not wanting to be left alone with the scared group, or maybe wanting to be part of the adventure, decided to go with him. They left the safety of the group in the field and walked along the length of the massive wall. The shaking was still coming from the other side, from inside the graveyard. To see what it was, they had to go all the way around to the main entrance. They found the old iron gate that led into the cemetery. It was unlocked, as it usually was back then. They pushed it open, the hinges groaning in the silence of the night. Stepping into the graveyard changed the atmosphere immediately. The air felt colder inside the walls. The moonlight cast pale beams on the headstones, making them glow against the dark grass. They walked slowly, trying to be quiet, stepping over roots and navigating through the rows of graves. They made their way toward the back wall, toward the spot where the river flowed just on the other side, and where the bushes were located. As they got closer to the wall, they could hear the rustling sound getting louder. It was a frantic scratching noise, leaves slapping against leaves. My dad said his heart started beating a little faster, but he kept going. They approached the specific bush, which was quite close to the edge of the property, where the land dropped off into the river. They stopped a few feet away. My dad squinted into the darkness. It was late, and the shadows were deep, so he couldn't see details clearly, but he could see shapes. He looked up at the bush. There, sitting in the tangled branches and leaves, was a figure. It wasn't an animal. My dad grew up in the country. He knew what a fox, a badger, or a stray dog looked like. This wasn't that. He described it as a humanoid figure, but it was small. He estimated it was about 4 feet tall. It was crouching in the bush, using its hands to violently shake the branches back and forth. Because of the darkness, he could only see the outline. It looked like a small person, entirely black, just a silhouette against the night sky. My dad stood there, frozen. His brain tried to process what he was seeing. Was it a person? A prank? But who would be sitting in a graveyard bush at 2 a.m, silently shaking it? It wasn't a drunk friend. They were all back in the field. It couldn't be a little kid playing a prank. No parent would let their child out in a graveyard at that hour, and the figure was too small to be a teenager or an adult. The figure didn't make a sound. It didn't giggle or shout. It just kept shaking the bush, violently and rhythmically. A sudden primal fear washed over my dad. The hair on his arms stood up. He grabbed his girlfriend's hand, and the urge to be a tough guy evaporated instantly. He screamed, or maybe she screamed, he can't remember, and they turned and ran. They ran like hell. They sprinted back through the graveyard, stumbling over the uneven ground, not caring about the noise they were making. They burst through the gate, ran back around the wall, and didn't stop until they reached the group of friends in the field. They were breathless and pale. They told their friends they needed to leave, right now. They didn't even fully explain what they saw until they were safely in a car and driving away. They never went back to investigate. They never found out what it was. But my dad always stuck to his story. It was too small to be a man, too big to be a typical animal, and way too strange to be anything natural. That story became a part of our family lore. We loved it because it was scary, but also because it was hard to imagine our dad, who was a logical and practical man, running away from a bush. Years passed. Life moved on, as it always does. My dad grew up. He got married, had 2 kids, me and my brother, and eventually went through a divorce. He moved away from that small hometown and settled in Birmingham, a big city far away from the quiet, creepy fields of his youth. But he never forgot that night. Whenever we visited our grandparents who still lived in the hometown, my dad would sometimes drive us past the area. He showed me and my brother the exact spot. I know where it is now. I have stood in that field. Even in the daylight, looking at that 8-foot wall with the overhanging shrubbery, the place creeps the fuck out of me. The river still runs dark and slow nearby, and the silence there still feels heavy. This is where the story takes a turn from just a spooky memory to something truly chilling. Recently, my family gathered for my grandparents' wedding anniversary. It was a nice occasion. We were all together, my dad, my brother, me, and our grandparents. We had finished a big dinner and were sitting around the table with cups of tea, feeling full and happy. The conversation naturally turned to the past. We started reminiscing about childhood memories, the trouble we used to get into, and the silly things we did. Somehow, the topic shifted to danger. We started talking about near-death experiences. My dad has had a few of them in his life. He was a bit of a wild child. We were talking about one particular incident where he nearly drowned when he was a teenager, swimming where he shouldn't have been. My grandmother, nodding along, started talking about the dangers of the local waters. She has a memory like a steel trap. She remembers everything that happened in the town for the last 50 years. She started talking about how dangerous that specific river next to the graveyard was. "Do you remember," she asked my grandfather, "that poor little mite who drowned there years ago? It was all over the papers." My ears perked up. My dad looked at her. "Which one?" he asked. "Oh, it was a terrible tragedy," my grandmother said, her voice dropping to a respectful whisper. "A little toddler, a boy, I think. He wasn't more than 3 or 4 years old." She went on to explain the details. Apparently back in the day, a local family had lost track of their young child. The kid had wandered off. He had climbed up onto that big stone wall, the one separating the field from the graveyard. He was playing up there, as kids do, not understanding the danger. He had slipped. He fell from the wall, but he didn't fall into the field. He fell on the other side, down the steep bank and straight into the river. Because it was secluded and the water was deep and slow, no one heard him. He drowned right there in the shadow of the graveyard wall. My dad went completely pale. The table went silent. My brother and I looked at each other, and then we looked at our dad. We were all doing the math in our heads. The toddler was 3 or 4 years old. That would make him about 3 or 4 feet tall. The child fell from the wall near the river. That was the exact spot where the bush was. The incident my grandmother was talking about happened a few years before my dad was 17. The timeline fit perfectly. My dad sat there, his cup of tea hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked like he had seen a ghost all over again. For 34 years he had told this story about the 4-foot figure in the bush. He had joked about it, puzzled over it, and tried to rationalize it. But he had never connected it to a real tragedy. He had never known about the little boy who died on that exact spot. For the first time in 34 years, he decided to tell his parents about his experience. "Mom, Dad," he started, his voice a little shaky. "I never told you this, but when I was 17, he told them everything. He told them about the windless night. He told them about the shaking bush. He told them about going into the graveyard with his girlfriend. And he told them in detail about the small 4-foot figure he saw sitting in the bushes, shaking the branches violently right above the river. When he finished, the room was dead silent. My grandmother put her hand over her mouth. My grandfather just stared at him. It suddenly made sense in the most horrifying way. The figure my dad saw wasn't a monster. It wasn't an alien. It wasn't a prank. It was a small child. A child who had died playing on that wall. A child who, perhaps, was still trying to play, shaking the bushes in the middle of the night, forever stuck in the place where he fell. Everyone was a bit creeped out, to say the least. The cozy anniversary dinner had turned into something much heavier. We didn't stay up much longer after that. The drive back to our hotel that night felt longer than usual. I still think about it often. I think about my dad being 17, trying to be brave for his girlfriend, walking into the dark. I think about him staring at that small, dark outline, and I wonder if he had stayed a little longer, if he hadn't run away. Would the figure have turned around? And if it had, would he have seen the face of a drowned toddler staring back at him? It is strange how stories evolve. For most of my life, it was just Dad's ghost story. It was a bit of fun. But now, knowing the history, knowing that a real life was lost right there, it feels different. It feels sadder, and it feels much, much more real. The next time I go back to my hometown, I don't think I will visit that field. I don't think I want to see the wall or the river. I am happy to leave that place to the memory of the little boy and whatever else might be walking around in the dark at 2 in the morning. Some things are better left alone. It was the middle of winter, and the world outside was covered in a thick blanket of snow. It was that specific time of year that always feels a little bit magical and a little bit lazy: Christmas break. My sister and I were both back home from college, enjoying the break from exams, dorm rooms, and responsibilities. There is a certain kind of comfort that you only get when you are back in your parents' house. The fridge is always full, the heating is always on, and you feel like a kid again, even if you are technically an adult. We were staying up late, which was our tradition whenever we were home together. The rest of the house was dark and quiet. My parents had gone to sleep hours ago, retreating to their bedroom upstairs. My sister and I were downstairs in the den, curled up on the comfortable old couches, watching late-night TV with the volume turned down low, so we wouldn't wake anyone up. The only light in the room came from the flickering glow of the television screen and the colorful Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner of the living room next door. Because we were home and bored and perhaps feeling a little bit rebellious against the wholesome family atmosphere, we had decided to get high. We smoked a little bit of weed, just enough to make the terrible late-night movies seem funny and to make us feel incredibly relaxed. We were giggling at nothing, whispering jokes to each other, and enjoying the warm, fuzzy feeling of being safe at home. But as anyone who has ever smoked knows, eventually the hunger sets in. The munchies hit us hard. We started talking about food. We listed all the things in the pantry, but nothing sounded quite right. Then we remembered the fudge. My mother made this incredible homemade fudge every year for Christmas. It was rich, creamy, and packed with chocolate. She had made a fresh batch earlier that day, specifically for a big family party that was happening the next afternoon. She had poured the hot fudge onto a large ceramic plate to let it cool and harden, and she had covered it carefully with a layer of clear plastic wrap. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, strictly off limits until the party. We looked at each other. We knew we shouldn't touch it. We knew Mom would be annoyed if we messed up the presentation before the guests arrived. But the craving was too strong. We decided we would just be very, very sneaky about it. We crept into the kitchen like ninjas. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the streetlights casting shadows through the window above the sink. The house was dead silent. We tiptoed over to the counter where the holy grail of snacks was waiting. We carefully peeled back the plastic wrap, trying not to make too much noise. The smell of chocolate hit us immediately. We grabbed a butter knife and performed surgery on the fudge. We didn't just hack into the middle of it. We were smarter than that. We carefully cut off small, thin slivers from around the very edge of the block. We smoothed out the sides with the knife so that it looked perfectly untouched. We ate the pieces quickly, savoring the sugar rush. When we were done, we pulled the plastic wrap back over the plate, smoothing it out so it looked tight and pristine, just like Mom had left it. We high-fived each other for our stealthiness and went back to the den. After a while, the sleepiness started to take over. I looked at the clock and realized it was getting late. I was also waiting for a phone call from my boyfriend at the time. Back then, we didn't all have cell phones glued to our hands, so I had to use the landline. I decided I wanted to be in my own bed when he called so I could talk privately. I told my sister goodnight. She was still wide awake, watching some infomercial on the TV, looking comfortable on the couch. I grabbed the cordless phone handset from the base in the kitchen and headed upstairs. I walked through the dark hallway, climbed the stairs, and went into my bedroom. I closed the door, climbed into my warm bed, and pulled the covers up. I felt safe and happy. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring, drifting in and out of a light doze. I don't know exactly how much time passed. It might have been an hour, It might have been 2. The house was completely silent. Then my bedroom door burst open. I jolted awake, my heart slamming against my ribs. My sister came running into my room. She wasn't walking, she was sprinting. She slammed the door shut behind her and practically dove onto my bed. It was dark, but even in the shadows, I could see that something was wrong. She was panic-stricken. Her eyes were wide and she was shaking violently. She was gasping for air, but she wasn't screaming. She was whispering. She was terrified to make a sound. "Give me the phone," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Where is the phone? Give it to me." I was confused and groggy. "What? What's going on?" She didn't answer. She started digging frantically through my blankets, throwing pillows aside, searching for the handset I had brought up with me. She was hysterical, tears streaming down her face, but she kept her voice at a bare whisper. "We need the phone," she cried softly. "Right now." We finally found the phone buried under the duvet. She snatched it from my hand. Her fingers were shaking so hard she could barely hit the buttons. She didn't call our parents. She dialed 3 numbers. 911. My stomach dropped. The weed haze evaporated instantly. "Why are you calling the police?" I whispered, finally catching her fear. She held the phone to her ear, her other hand gripping my arm so tight it hurt. "There is someone in the house," she whispered. I froze. I listened to the silence of the house. I couldn't hear anything. She gave our address to the operator, her voice cracking. She told them she heard an intruder downstairs. She told them to hurry. After she hung up, we didn't wait. We knew we had to wake up Mom and Dad before the police arrived with sirens wailing. We ran down the hall to our parents' bedroom. We shook them awake. My dad was confused, groggy, and trying to figure out why his daughters were crying in the dark. My mom sat up, terrified. "The police are coming," my sister said. "I heard someone. Someone is downstairs." My dad, being the protector, immediately wanted to go downstairs and check. My sister grabbed him and begged him not to go. She was absolutely certain that whoever was down there was dangerous. Then a new panic hit me, the weed. We had left our stash and a pipe on the coffee table in the den. If the police came in and searched the house, they would find the intruder, but they would also find our drugs. In my young, panicked mind, this felt like a disaster, but I couldn't go down there to hide it. If there really was a burglar, I would be walking right into them. I had to just pray the police wouldn't care about a little bit of pot while looking for a criminal. We heard the sirens in the distance getting louder. Then we saw the flashing blue and red lights reflect off the snow outside and dance across the bedroom walls. The police had arrived. We stayed upstairs while the officers entered the house. We could hear their heavy boots on the hardwood floors. We heard the crackle of their radios. We heard them opening doors and checking closets. My dad went down to talk to them, while my mom, my sister, and I huddled together in the bedroom. My sister refused to leave the room. She was curled up in a ball, refusing to speak about what she had heard. After about 20 minutes, my dad came back upstairs. The police were with him. "They didn't find anyone," Dad said. He looked relieved, but also a little annoyed. "The back door was unlocked, but there's no sign of forced entry. Nothing seems to be missing. They checked the basement, the garage, everywhere. It's clear." The police officers were nice about it. They said they would patrol the neighborhood, but the house was empty. They suggested that maybe the wind had blown a door open or an animal had made a noise. My sister wouldn't accept it. She shook her head violently. "I heard him," she whispered. "I know he was there." The police left. The house was quiet again, but the feeling of safety was gone. None of us wanted to go back to our own rooms. My sister was too terrified to be alone, and honestly, so was I. My dad decided he would stay awake for the rest of the night, sitting in the chair by the window, keeping watch. My mom, my sister, and I all climbed into my parents' big king-sized bed. We lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. It was a long, sleepless night. Finally, the sun began to rise. The gray light of morning filled the room, and the terrors of the night began to feel a little bit silly, as they often do in the daylight. My dad had fallen asleep in the chair. We all woke up, stiff and tired. My sister looked embarrassed. She sat up and rubbed her face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I must have freaked out over nothing. We were high. Maybe I just imagined it. I feel so stupid for calling the police." "It's okay," I told her, though I was secretly relieved she was admitting it. Better safe than sorry. We all got up and went downstairs to start the day. The house looked normal. The Christmas tree was still there. The TV was off. The sun was shining on the snow outside. It felt like a regular morning. My sister walked into the kitchen ahead of me. I was right behind her, thinking about making a strong pot of coffee. Suddenly, she stopped dead in her tracks. She stopped so fast I almost bumped into her. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the kitchen counter. "What?" I asked, stepping around her. Then I saw her face. All the color had drained out of it. She looked ashen, paler than she had been the night before. Her eyes were locked on the counter. She started backing away, slowly shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. What the hell happened last night?" I practically screamed at her, scared by her reaction. "Tell me right now." She pointed a shaking finger at the counter. "I was in the den," she stammered, her voice trembling. "The den is right next to the kitchen. I heard rustling. It was loud. It sounded like the plastic wrap being moved around. It went on for 10 minutes. I sat there, frozen, listening to someone in the kitchen. I finally got up the nerve to run past the kitchen to the stairs to get to you." I looked at where she was pointing. I looked at the plate of fudge. When we had left it the night before, we had carefully smoothed the plastic wrap down. It had been perfect. Now the plastic wrap was torn back. It was crinkled and messy, tossed to the side. And the fudge. There was a huge piece missing. It wasn't a mouse. A mouse would have left tiny nibble marks or droppings. A mouse would have gnawed at the corner. This was different. A massive, jagged chunk of the fudge had been broken off. It looked like someone had reached in with a large hand and grabbed a fistful of it. It was a human-sized portion. We stared at the plate in horror. My dad came into the kitchen behind us. He saw us staring. He looked at the fudge. He tried to rationalize it immediately. "It must have been a mouse," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Or a raccoon. Something got in." "There are no teeth marks, Dad," I said, my voice shaking. "And we didn't see any droppings. And the plastic. Look at the plastic." My sister started crying again. This time, it wasn't hysteria. It was a deep, quiet dread. She realized how close she had been. She had been sitting on the couch in the next room, just a few feet away, through an open archway. For 10 minutes, she had listened to a stranger standing in our kitchen, in the dark, eating my mother's fudge. If she had walked into the kitchen, instead of running to the stairs. If she had called out. We never found out who it was. The police report was filed as a false alarm. Nothing else was stolen. The weed was still on the table in the den, thankfully. But the feeling of violation lasted for a long time. My father swore up and down for years that it had to be a rodent. He checked the walls for holes. He set traps. He caught nothing. He just couldn't admit that someone had been in the house with his family while he slept. It took a long time before we could talk about it normally. It took years before my sister could joke about the fudge monster with the rest of us. But even now, when we tell the story and laugh about the mysterious intruder with a sweet tooth, there is a moment where the laughter dies down. We look at each other and we remember the missing chunk of chocolate, the crinkled plastic, and the terrifying realization that we were not alone in the house that night. John was rapidly approaching his 40th birthday, and there was a quiet, nagging voice in the back of his mind that would not leave him alone. It whispered to him late at night and during the quiet moments of his morning commute. It told him that he was not the same man he used to be. When he was 20 years old, he had felt completely unstoppable. He had been quick-minded, physically strong, and entirely fearless. He had energy that seemed to burn like an endless fire. But now, nearly 2 decades later, things were different. He caught himself getting tired much faster than before. His thoughts felt a little slower, a little foggier. He found himself worrying about things that never would have crossed his mind in his youth. He did not like this feeling at all. In fact, he hated it. He wanted to prove to himself that he still had that same fire inside him. He wanted to know that he still possessed the sharp edge and the raw survival instincts he had always been so proud of. So, after weeks of thinking about it and planning every detail in his head, he decided to do something about it. He packed a small, efficient survival kit. He included a detailed topographic map, a high-quality compass, a sharp hunting knife, some basic camping gear, and a bag of dried food rations. He did not pack a tent or a heavy sleeping bag because he wanted to challenge himself. He loaded up his truck and drove far outside the city limits. He drove for hours, watching the buildings fade away and be replaced by fields and then by dense forests. He kept driving until he reached the deepest, thickest woods he could find on the map. This was a place where there were no rental cabins, no marked hiking trails, no family campers, and no fishing spots. It was nothing but trees and silence stretching out for miles in every direction. He wanted to disappear into nature for a full week, completely alone, just to see if he still had it in him to survive and thrive. On the first day, the adrenaline was pumping through his veins. He pushed himself harder than he probably should have. He parked his truck on the side of a gravel fire road and walked straight into the forest, leaving the faint path behind him almost immediately. He walked until the road was just a memory, and then he walked some more until the path vanished completely into the undergrowth. He did not want any signs of civilization around him. He wanted to carve out his own space in the wild. He wanted to build his own shelter from fallen branches and live off the land like he had always imagined doing when he was a young, dreamy boy reading adventure novels. The morning passed quickly, and the afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky. By late afternoon, he decided he needed to set up a rabbit snare before nightfall if he wanted to eat fresh meat. He began wandering around, looking for a good spot to set his trap. He kept his eyes on the ground, searching for small tracks, droppings, or signs of wildlife trails. He was so focused on the ground that he didn't realize how far he had drifted or how much he had turned. The deeper he walked, the less familiar everything looked. The trees seemed to grow closer together, their branches weaving a thick net that blocked out the sky. He stopped and looked around. He turned in a slow circle, expecting to see a landmark he recognized, perhaps a distinct rock or a crooked tree he had passed earlier, but he did not recognize a single thing. Every tree looked exactly the same as the one next to it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his compass, feeling a small spike of anxiety in his chest. He looked down at the dial, but the needle was floating lazily, not pointing firmly in the direction he expected. He tapped the glass, but it didn't help. He looked up at the sky to check the sun's position, but heavy gray clouds had rolled in silently and swallowed the sun completely. The light was flat and gray, making it impossible to tell east from west. Slowly, the uneasy feeling crept in. It started in his stomach and worked its way up to his throat. He was lost. He took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. He told himself not to panic. Panic was the enemy of survival. He told himself that he still had hours of daylight left and that he just needed to think logically. But soon he realized he was wrong about the time. The clouds were not just passing through, they were a storm front. They rolled in with terrifying speed, turning the gray sky into a bruised purple and black. The whole forest darkened as if someone had dimmed a light switch. Within minutes, the wind changed direction. The temperature dropped rapidly, biting through his jacket. Then the sky opened up. Rain poured down in heavy, relentless sheets. It wasn't a gentle shower, it was a deluge. It soaked through his clothes in seconds, chilling him to the bone. The ground turned into a slurry of mud. His boots sank into the earth, with every step making walking a chore. His hands began to tremble from the sudden cold. He knew with a sudden, sharp clarity that he was in trouble. He needed shelter immediately, or he was going to risk hypothermia. He started searching frantically for a place to sleep. He looked for a large fallen tree he could crawl under, or a cluster of thick bushes he could weave into a windbreak. He looked for a cave or an overhang, but the woods were not kind that evening. The rain grew heavier, blurring his vision. The ground grew slick and treacherous. The shadows thickened as the last bit of daylight drained away, leaving him stumbling in the near darkness. Then, through the trees, he saw something far in the distance. It was just a shape at first, barely visible through the downpour. It was a structure, a crooked, jagged outline standing against the darkness of the trees. It was a shack. He blinked the rain out of his eyes and wiped his face with a wet sleeve, staring hard. Yes, it was definitely a shack. It looked old. It was rotting and leaning to one side, looking like a strong wind might blow it over. But it was real. It was a man-made structure. He didn't know who had built it or why it was out here in the middle of nowhere, miles from any road. But at that moment, it felt like the best luck he had ever had in his life. He told himself he could survive anything if he just made it through the night. He could rough it out until morning. Once the rain stopped and the sun came up, he could find his bearings and find the path again. He pushed forward, his legs burning with effort. Branches scraped against his arms and mud splashed up to his knees. He slipped and stumbled, but he kept his eyes on the dark shape of the shack. By the time he finally reached it, the night had fully set in. It was so dark he couldn't even see the outline of the roof against the sky. His hands reached out blindly in front of him until they touched the rough, wet wood of the wall. It felt soft with rot, spongy and damp, as if the wood had been standing there decaying for 50 years. He felt his way along the wall until he found the door. He pushed it. It resisted for a moment, then swung open. It creaked loudly, a long, high-pitched groan that echoed through the quiet forest and made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He stepped into the doorway. Thick cobwebs brushed across his forehead and tangled in his wet hair. He reached up and pulled them off with a shiver of disgust. He stood there in the pitch black, cursing himself for leaving his heavy flashlight at home to save weight. Lighting that flashlight right now would have felt like lighting a beacon of hope. Instead, he dug into his damp pocket and found a small cardboard box of matches. He tried to keep his hands steady as he pulled one out. He struck it against the side of the box. It hissed, sparked, and then glowed weakly. The small flame gave off a dim orange light that barely pushed back the darkness. The light danced across the walls, casting long, jumping shadows. He stepped fully inside and closed the door behind him to shut out the wind. The shack smelled old, really old. It smelled like wet wood, black mold, stale dust, and something else he couldn't quite name. It was a musk, like an animal den or something that had been abandoned for a century. The floorboards creaked and groaned under his heavy boots. He held the match up higher, trying to see where he was. The flickering light revealed something he didn't expect. The walls were covered in paintings. There were dozens of them. They were not beautiful landscapes of the forest or happy portraits of a family. They were not simple sketches or abstract art. They were faces, they were human faces, painted in dark, heavy strokes. Some of the faces were twisted in absolute pain, their mouths opened wide in silent, eternal screams. Some had hollow, sunken eyes that looked full of fear and despair. Others had angry, hateful expressions, their brows furrowed and their lips curled back in snarls as if they resented anyone who dared to enter the room. Their eyes seemed to follow him. At least, in the flickering light, it felt like they did. Some of the faces were pointing directly at him, their painted fingers stretched out as if they were warning him to leave or accusing him of some unknown crime. The match flickered again as a draft came through the walls. The shadows stretched and twisted, making every face look like it was moving, shifting, and breathing. He swallowed hard and stared, his heart pounding against his ribs. He didn't know who had painted them. He didn't know why someone would take the time to fill a small, rotting shack in the middle of the deep woods with such terrifying images. Every instinct in his body screamed that this place was wrong. It felt evil. He tried to ignore the feeling. He was a rational man. He told himself that shadows play tricks on tired minds. The rain and the cold were making him nervous. Fear was making everything look worse than it really was. It was just art, he told himself. Just creepy art left by some hermit years ago. He was exhausted. He was freezing cold. He needed sleep more than he needed to be comfortable with the decor. The match burned down to his fingers, stinging his skin. He blew it out and let the darkness settle around him like a heavy blanket. A part of him felt a massive wave of relief the moment the paintings disappeared from his sight. He didn't want to look at those hateful eyes anymore. But another part of him felt worse. Now that it was dark, he couldn't see them at all. He could only imagine them. He could only picture them hanging there in the dark, staring at him. He fumbled around in the dark until he found a musty old bed frame along the far wall. The mattress sagged in the middle and smelled of mildew. The blanket bunched on top of it was damp, but it was better than sleeping on the floor. He lay down, curled his knees up to his chest to preserve body heat, and tried to force himself to sleep. He couldn't do it. Thunder boomed outside, shaking the ground. The wind rattled the rotting boards, making the whole shack groan. Water dripped rhythmically from a hole in the roof somewhere in the corner, a steady drip, drip, drip that sounded like a ticking clock. He kept thinking about the faces, the screaming ones, the pointing ones, the way the shadows seemed to crawl toward him when the match was lit. His heart beat too fast to relax. His skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with the cold. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined those faces pressed right up against his own face, screaming silently into his ears. He finally drifted in and out of a restless, shallow sleep. He woke up every time the thunder cracked loudly, or whenever he thought he heard something move inside the shack. At one point, deep in the night, he felt like someone was standing right near the bed, breathing shallowly. He froze, listening, his eyes squeezed shut. But when he opened his eyes, there was nothing there, just the impenetrable darkness. He told himself it was just the wind. Morning came slowly. It didn't arrive with a burst of sunlight, but rather with a thin, gray light that began seeping into the shack, turning the blackness into a murky gray. John's eyes opened. The first thing he saw was the ceiling above him, rotted, water-stained wood with gaps where the sky peeked through. He sat up quietly, rubbing his arms vigorously to get the blood flowing. His breath was visible in the cold morning air, puffing out in small white clouds. He felt heavy, stiff, and deeply uneasy. Then he remembered the paintings. He turned his head quickly, wanting to get it over with. He wanted to see them in the clear daylight so he could convince himself they weren't as terrifying as he remembered. He wanted to laugh at his own fear, but when he turned to look at the wall, he froze. There were no paintings, not a single one. The walls were completely empty. The wood was bare, stained only by water and age. John's heart gave a massive, painful thud in his chest. He frowned, confused. He thought maybe he had looked at the wrong wall. He turned his head to the other side. Nothing. He stood up and turned around fully, scanning the entire room. The shack was small. There was nowhere for them to hide. The walls were bare. He stepped closer, scanning every inch of the wood. No paintings, no frames, no nail holes where frames used to hang, no square outlines where dust had collected around a canvas. There was absolutely no sign that anything had ever hung on those walls. Instead, the walls were lined with windows. They were long, narrow, dusty windows. He stood there, his mind racing, trying to put the pieces together. In the dim, flickering light of his single match the night before, he had mistaken the rectangular shapes for paintings. It was an easy mistake to make in the dark, but now, as the gray morning light filtered through the glass, he realized something far more unsettling, something that made his blood run cold. The faces he thought he saw weren't painted on canvas. They were reflections. Or worse, they weren't reflections at all. He looked at the windows again. They were grimy and covered in years of dirt. But last night, it had been pitch black inside the shack and pitch black outside. If he had been looking at a reflection of himself, he would have seen one face moving when he moved. But he had seen dozens. He had seen faces that were screaming, faces that were hating, faces that were old and young. That meant the faces weren't inside the room with him. They were shapes in the glass. They were shadows moving outside. Something in the cold silence of the morning made his skin crawl violently. He looked at the angles of the windows. They were at head height. The glass was fogged from the inside, but streaks of rain had cleared parts of the outside. He stepped closer, trembling. He leaned in and wiped a small circle of condensation away with his fingertip to see clearly. Outside the window there was nothing, just the dense forest, the gray sky. The rain drips from the heavy branches of the pines. Absolute silence, but in the faint, foggy outline left on the glass where the condensation had been disturbed, he thought he could still see the shape of a face. A mouth opens wide, eyes wide and staring. He took a sharp step back, stumbling over his own boots. The room felt suddenly colder, freezing the air in his lungs. The impurity hit him like a physical blow. For him to see faces in the windows last night, while he held a match inside, there had to be something pressing against the glass from the outside. Something standing in the storm, watching him. Something that wanted to be seen. He didn't wait to investigate further. He didn't look for footprints in the mud outside. He grabbed his gear, shoving his blanket into his bag with shaking hands. He stumbled out of the shack into the damp morning air, his heart racing like a trapped bird. He didn't look back at the shack. He didn't stop walking. He didn't try to figure out where he had gone wrong with his compass or try to find his snare. He just moved. He walked fast, half running, crashing through the brush until the sun rose high enough that he could see the direction of the sun through the clouds. He used the sun to find east, and he walked until his legs burned. It took him hours to find the main trail again. When he finally reached the gravel road and saw his truck, he almost cried with relief. He drove home in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. When he finally reached civilization, he didn't tell anyone what happened. He didn't tell his wife. He didn't tell his friends. He didn't have the words to explain it, and he didn't want to admit how close he came to panicking or how deeply that shack had unsettled him. He didn't want to admit that the tough survivor he wanted to be was actually a disenchanted man running from a shack in the woods. But he never went back to that forest. He never camped alone again. And he never forgot the faces staring at him from the windows in the dark, watching him sleep. I was spending the night at my boyfriend's house, something I had done many times before. His parents were gone for the night, so the entire house was ours. It was usually a calm place, an ordinary home with quiet hallways, soft yellow lamps, and a sense of comfort that made me feel safe. The only other living thing in the house was the family cat, who always slept downstairs and usually stayed there until morning. The upstairs was silent, dark, and still. My boyfriend has never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. He always told me I let my imagination run wild too easily. Whenever I talked about something strange or creepy, he would laugh, pat my hand, and say, "Don't worry, it's all in your head." I used to joke that if a ghost walked right past him, he still wouldn't believe it. He was that kind of person. Logical, relaxed, and grounded. That night, though, something happened that shook me in a way I still think about sometimes. We were sleeping in his room, already a few hours into the night. The room was dark except for the soft glow coming from the streetlight outside. His curtains were thin, so faint light always spilled through, painting dim shapes on the walls. The space felt peaceful at first. I drifted off comfortably, wrapped in the quiet hum of the house. My boyfriend had a habit of sleep-talking sometimes. Usually it was nonsense. Random words, half-sentences, or mumbling that made no sense. I had gotten used to it. But that night, what he did wasn't sleep-talking. It wasn't mumbling. It wasn't even half-awake confusion. He suddenly sat up straight in the bed. He moved quickly, like someone who heard a loud sound or sensed danger. The sudden motion jolted me awake. I opened my eyes, disoriented, and saw him sitting upright with his back stiff, his breathing a little heavier than normal. Then he said, in a fully awake voice, "Turn on the light. It's here watching us." His tone wasn't joke-like or sleepy or confused. It was calm and direct, the way he spoke when he was completely awake. I blinked a few times, trying to understand what he meant. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice groggy. I thought he might be dreaming, but he didn't look like someone dreaming. He didn't look confused. He looked alert. "You want me to turn on the light?" "Yes," he said. "Turn on the light. It's in the room watching us." Something cold slipped down my spine. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way he said them, slow, serious, like he meant every bit of it. I sat up slowly, trying to figure out if he was awake or asleep. His eyes were open. He was looking at the room around us. He wasn't blinking much, but he didn't seem lost or dazed. He looked like someone who had noticed something I hadn't. So I got out of bed. The room was dark, and the air felt heavy and strange. I walked to the light switch, my feet cold on the floor, and turned the light on. The room filled with warm, yellow brightness. Nothing looked unusual, just clothes, a desk, the curtains, the door, the shelves. He looked around the room, then let out a small sigh of relief. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're fine." I turned off the light again, confused, and got back into bed. The darkness returned, and the room went silent again. I could hear his breathing start to slow as he rolled over to his side. "You made it go away," he murmured, and before I could ask anything, he was asleep again. Fully asleep, breathing evenly. I lay there staring at the ceiling, not sure what to think. My heart was beating too fast, and the room suddenly felt too quiet. I tried to tell myself he must have been dreaming. Maybe something scared him while he was asleep, and he woke up confused. But he had seemed so calm and sure, not like someone who didn't know where he was. I finally closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. A little while later, something woke him up again. This time, he wasn't sitting up. He was lying on his back, but staring intensely at the wall beside me. The wall with the windowsill, and the faint reflection from the outside streetlight. His eyes looked wide and focused, not empty, not foggy. Awake. "Look at the windowsill," he whispered. "The shadow." I turned my head slowly and saw the soft reflection from the streetlight. It always hit that part of the wall in a stretched shape, like a dim patch of light. Nothing unusual, just a reflection you barely noticed most nights. He pointed at it. "There," he said. "The ghost. It's sitting in the reflection." His voice didn't shake. He sounded like he was describing something perfectly normal, something obvious. He wasn't panicking, he wasn't screaming, he was calm, which somehow made it much more frightening. I swallowed hard. "You need to wake up," I told him. "Stop being weird." But he didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on that patch of light. "Move it away," he said. "What?" "Move what?" He repeated it. "Move it away. The ghost is sitting on the windowsill. You just have to move it." I stared at him. I didn't know if he was awake or dreaming or something in between. He reached across me, stretching over my body since I was the one sleeping closest to the wall, and grabbed my hand. He lifted my hand gently and guided it toward the patch of light on the wall. Then he made me do a wiping motion, like wiping steam off a window or brushing dust off a surface. My hand moved back and forth across the wall, following his pressure. As I did it, I saw the reflection shift slightly. Maybe it was just the angle of my hand blocking a little of the light. Maybe it was my eyes adjusting because I had just woken up. Maybe I imagined it. But in that moment, it felt like something moved out of the reflection. He looked at the wall for a moment, then nodded. "See," he whispered, "it's gone now. You made it go away." Then he turned onto his side, pulled the blanket up over his shoulder, and fell asleep instantly. Not slowly, not gradually, instantly, just like someone who had never been awake at all. I lay there for a long time, completely frozen, staring at the wall, staring at the reflection, staring at the windowsill. I listened to his breathing, listened to the quiet house, listened for the slightest noise that might tell me I wasn't alone. That night, every little sound felt louder. The ticking of the clock, the faint movement of the house settling, even the soft buzz of electricity in the walls felt wrong. I didn't sleep for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something standing in the corner, watching us, like he said. Eventually, morning came and light filled the room. He woke up cheerful, stretching and yawning like he had slept the entire night without interruption. I asked him cautiously, "Do you remember anything you said last night?" He blinked at me. "What?" "No, why?" "You woke up twice," I told him quietly, "saying something was watching us. You said there was a ghost. You made me move it away." He frowned, confused. "I didn't do that. I must have been talking in my sleep." But his voice the night before, it hadn't sounded like sleep talking. It had sounded real, solid, intentional. He had acted awake, not confused, not groggy, awake. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Something about the whole experience felt wrong. The calmness in his voice, the way he acted so certain, the way he guided my hand, the way he fell asleep again immediately afterward. It didn't fit his personality at all. He wasn't the type to get scared by shadows. He wasn't the type to imagine ghosts. He didn't believe in any of it. I didn't tell him how scared I really was. But for the next few nights, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that same patch of light on the wall and something sitting in it, watching. I replayed his voice over and over again in my head, saying, "It's here watching us." Even now, I don't know what happened that night. Maybe he was dreaming. Maybe I was half asleep and saw the light move in a way that felt unnatural. Maybe we were both tired and our minds played tricks on us. But deep inside, a part of me still remembers the exact tone of his voice. Calm, certain, awake. And the way he looked around the room like he wasn't seeing what I was seeing. And that part of me can't shake the feeling that something else was there with us. Something he saw, something I didn't. Something that left only after he told me to make it go away. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Shadow Archives, because there are more stories waiting, and not all of them end before it's too late.